Welcome to Comics Fantastic History, one of the spin-offs of the regular podcast. Today I have Peter Normanton, who's also on the regular podcast feed of a host of TwoMorrows shows that I'm doing. Peter is the editor of Cryptology. He's joining me today to talk about some horror comic stuff. Peter, tell the fans a little bit about Cryptology and why they should buy it from TwoMorrows.
It's a magazine, it's a vintage retro styled horror magazine covering films, television, horror comics, the pulps, graphic novels. We've got paperbacks in there, we've got radio broadcasts, we've got models and toys. We're trying to cover the whole remit on anything horror related from the past.
We're
And
talking
we're trying to
about such an eclectic mix. Do you guys like have a dartboard and you just kind of take the darts and go bang? Oh,
It's just things come up. I know there's certain things when you're doing an issue you'd like to have in there. So I put it out to our writers, we're going to be doing this. Have you got any of your own ideas? And we try to fit it all together. If there's something I think should be in there and nobody's going to stand up to write it, it truly gets the job, and I hope it comes across well. So we do try to balance things.
balance.
But I'm trying to.
You can go to a lot of sites and get some ideas from cryptology, but why should fans, especially the newer ones, dig up those old classic iconic pre-code horror comic books that are out there? Oh,
There's just a wealth of material there. It's got some amazing artists. You've got Graham Ingalls in there, Jack Davis, Jack Cayman's in there, Johnny Craig, people like Russ Heath, Bill Everett, early Steve Ditko. Jack Kirby's in there. I know that Jack Kirby's stuff is not as extreme as others, but it's still very good, thoughtful stuff. There's just a wealth of material. It didn't all thrive on blood and guts, but there's plenty of it. And there's some quite thoughtful material from back in the 1950s. Every company seemed to have, even though they were jumping on the bandwagon, different ways of doing things. And there's some great collections out there now. You don't have to be spending a fortune on these comics. I used to work for Pete Crowther and PS Publishing's. They would call them PS Art Books. We did the Harvey Horror series, collected all the Harvey Horror comics. They've done stuff on ACG. The thing is collected in 2 volumes. So you can buy these comics now for reasonable prices in reprint forms.
a lot of fans might know like AC Horror Comics or Avon or some of those other bigger publishers, but what are some comic books that fans might be missing out and should check into?
I think anything Fawcett, their horror comics were excellent. They had people like Bernard Bailey working for them. Norman Saunders did some excellent covers. I'd always say Harvey as well. They were one of my go-tos when I first started. The Atlas line, I know they were probably regarded as they are the precursors to the great Marvel comics, but there's some fantastic stuff in there. Really is some good stuff.
Do you read comic books that come out now?
No, I don't, unfortunately. I had to stop a good few years ago, partially because I was retiring. And the other reason, I've just got such a massive collection. I must have about 12,000 comics up there.
I read somewhere that you were talking about Stan Lee's work as Atlas. What? Because people think about Stan Lee more of the superheroes. You think he wrote some really good stuff during the Atlas era for like horror comics and that type of
He's
stuff?
come off his time of the golden age, and then they went into these sort of horror anthologies with 4 or 5 stories in each issue. Now, Stan didn't write all of them. He had a few more writers on board with him who were all highly capable people. But I think as time went on, it became more Stan Lee. And there's such imaginative stories. Yeah,
I'm going to throw out some names of creators that fans might not associate with horror comic books. I'm going to give you a couple names and you tell me what you think. Don Heck, who know most people know him from the Silver Age.
yeah. I mean, his covers for comic media, for the weird terror and horrific titles, are absolutely fantastic. They would have stood out on the newsstand. The big blown up faces of people, either ghouls or vampires, or maybe somebody being throttled. He could do these. He was a great horror artist. He really was. He had a very fluid style with his brushes. They just flowed. I didn't think that always showed during the time when he was drawing superhero comics. He would have had other people inking him, so he wouldn't have got that chance to lay his own brushes over his own pencils. His pencil was very good. So yeah, I am a very big fan of Don Hicks from that period, and I enjoy superhero stuff as well.
How about Bill Everett?
Yeah, I love the Venus one is excellent. In fact, we've just done something in Cryptology 4 on Venus. It's called Pat Calhoun. He put together really good article. We put lots of brilliant art from Bill in. He always had a darkly comedic style. Bill was one of the essentials during the pre-code years. He was one of the essential artists. I always think him, Russ Heath, Joe Maneely, they were the big guys at the stand. They were essential. The covers they did and the stories they did. Oh, yeah.
How about Carmine Infantino, who's more known for the Silver Age Flash?
Now, I picked up on Carmine for the work he did for Atlas. I was doing something on the Atlas artists. It was during COVID. I was putting all these notes together on artists and sampling, just going through trying to find their artwork. That's when I never noticed until then, never realised that Carmine was a very good horror artist. It's his work for Atlas that really brought it out with me. There's not a lot of it, but it's almost like he's got a freedom there.
How about Joe Kubert?
Joe Kubert, I can remember reading this stuff when he started with St. John. And again, he's another great horror artist, but he carried on with horror during the 1970s with DC. He did some great story covers for House of Mystery. And there's just always something easy about Joe's work. You look at Joe's work and you think, I could do that myself. You could just conjure it.
Because a lot of fans think of Joe Kubert, they think of Hawkman, they think of his war stuff, but they don't realize he did stuff for Avon.
Yes, he did. Yeah, I mean, he did. There's a particular cover he did for one of St. John's comics. That's quite a gruesome cover. You would not associate that with the polished superhero work he was doing in the 60s and 70s. But it is quite an astonishing cover, actually. It's a particular favourite of mine.
How about Gene Colan before he went to Marvel in the 60s?
Gene was doing quite a bit of horror work for Atlas during the early 1950s. And you can see how his style develops. It's very much house style 1949-50, but we get to 1952, and some of the Gene Colan that we've come to know is there. I think he was one of the unsung horror artists of the 1950s. Of course, he was going to become better known for his superhero work during the 1960s, but then people like me know him for his work with Tomb of Dracula in the 70s. But during the 1950s, you can see in a very short space of time how his style develops and that confidence is there. And he's got an understanding of horror.
So did I miss any names off the top of your head that people might not be familiar with?
Well, obviously, an artist I've just mentioned is Russ Heath. People know for his war stories with DC and some of those fantastic covers he did. But he had a really dark edge to his style when he worked for Atlas. His covers were fantastic. Really, another one who just understood horror and what went with it. Some of them do make you think, and they're quite frightening. Some being dragged away by these zombie-like creatures, and they've got no hope. And he brings that across to you. So he'd be one of mine. Gil Kane's another one, because Gil Kane was there in the 50s. And you can already see that styles coming along. And of course, he was drawing the Tomb of Dracula covers with Tom Palmer in the 70s.
DC and Marvel both did horror spooky anthologies during the 70s. Who do you think did better, DC or Marvel?
When it came to the color comics, I think it was DC. But then Marvel did also have a string of black and white magazines, which elevated things somewhat.
Things a lot. We were talking about Gene Colan's Tomb of Dracula with Marv Wolfman during the 70s. Why do you think that stood up the test of time out of like all the Bronze Age stuff? You can still read that today and go, wow, why did it stand up to the time?
Yeah, it is. They've got a very good writer. We've got an interview with him coming up in issue 8 of Cryptology, the vampire, issue 7, the vampire issue. And he's a great story and they're great characters. And Gene Colan, with Tom Palmer's help, he makes Dracula very special because really we've been brought upon Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee. Gene gives it his own touch, maybe styling it upon Jack Palan's. And he does make him a very frightening character. I think all the cast are very three-dimensional. It is a very good supporting cast. For somebody living over here in England, it's nice to see it based in, a lot of the stories based in London and the
That's
surrounding
true,
area.
yes.
So
It,
there's always that link for me. I can relate to it all. But it was just very good story writing and a pairing of artists who did have a good grasp of horror, which Gene was already showing during the early 1950s.
were you a big fan of the Vertical line when they were doing that in the 1990s?
I did. I enjoyed the Vertigo. They were something new, something going for a more mature audience.
Is there some titles that fans might not necessarily know from the Vertical line that we should check out
Yeah, it
offhand?
there was Sandman there, wasn't there? The Sandman Mystery Theatre. I think Swamp Thing.
Did you like the Swamp Thing?
Yeah, we've got the Swamp Thing coming up in issue 19. Yes, we've got a piece coming up, I think, in the next year. One of the writers is writing something on Alan Moore's approach to the Swamp Thing. But I did enjoy the Tom Yates run prior to that. I think Tom's a great artist. I don't think people talk about him the way they should do. He's another one who was a very good horror artist. Obviously, the book became more popular once Alan Moore got his hands on it, and there's Steve Bissett and Jonathan Tortlimon. I can never say his name properly. They should remember what came before. I think fans should actually remember what came before. And there was Hellblazer as well, which, again, that was a very good comic. Again, a lot of it based in England, which was intriguing.
So, what is Peter Normanton's all-time favorite horror comic book or series?
I'll always have a leaning for the British reprint, Dracula Lives, because that's what I really started reading regularly with, because that reprinted Tomb of Dracula and the Frankenstein Monster. So you got plenty of Gene Colan in there, Mike Plew, Tom Sutton. And I used to copy those stories. And yeah, I mean, that's I'll always have fondness for Skyward horror as well. Nightmare, Psycho, and Scream. They were special to me. And yeah, definitely Bernie Wrightson and Len Swamp Thing from the early 1970s. Their comics I always do like to go back to. And again, with the Alan Moore issues of the Swamp Thing, they were special as well. And those early creepies when Archie Goodwin was the editor. I always liked Archie. He just had a way with him that if you want to be an editor, you want to do it like Archie. You seem to get the best people and the best from them.
Peter Normanton, I have enjoyed taking about this overall view of horror.
It's nice to reminisce about these old horror comics and chat with somebody. I don't get to do it a great deal. I think I've got friends down in London who are horror fans, but I don't get to do a great deal on a daily basis. So thank you very much.
Again, thank you for joining me for the podcast.